Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and this week, Mike Simmons is going to talk to Anthony Iannarino. Anthony is the author of The Lost Art of Closing and the only sales guide you'll ever need. He is also the host of the In the Arena podcast. Let's get to work with Anthony Iannarino.
Anthony, thank you very much for joining the podcast. I'm really excited to introduce you to our audience. I've followed your work here for about a year as we started building out and expanding what we do with Catalyst Sale. But the thing that triggered me asking you to join the podcast was your interview with Don Miller. Don had been on the podcast previously. He talked about the story brand framework. In that podcast, you talk a bit about, this predated your most recent book, but you talked a bit about the difference between mindset and skill set and importance of mindset and skill set for sales professionals. Why don't we start first with a little bit about yourself? Can you share some background with the audience about who you are, what you do, and where you're going with your business?
I am an international speaker and an author, coach, a consultant, and a sales leader. I have a number of businesses that I run, and I think a lot about sales, and I work a lot in that particular area. Where am I going is a more difficult question. I'm working right now to develop a platform to help other salespeople and sales leaders gain competencies that allows me to extend the reach by providing a learning management system. That's what's coming up in the future. And before we got on this call today, Mike, I was writing a couple thousand words for book number 3, which is soon to be released. Well, not that soon. It'll be October 2018. But the books are coming out at more than one a year at that pace right now. So we're doing pretty good on that front.
Awesome. And the first book was The Only Sales Guide You'll Ever Need. Your most recent book is The Lost Art of Closing. And as we go through this, we're kind of going to bounce back and forth between components that are in each of those books as we talk about the content that you put out in the marketplace. One of the things that really impresses me is the amount of content that you put in the marketplace. And in recent podcast, I think it was with the person you had on who was talking about pregame rituals. You talked about writing process and how you're able to put content out in the marketplace at such a consistent cadence. Can you share just some thoughts and ideas around that process and how you're able to execute on that?
It's the first book, The Only Sales Guide You'll Ever Need. The very first chapter in that book is self-discipline. And it was the chapter that the first publisher that asked me for a book hated the most. And he said to me, why on earth would you start a book with self-discipline? Why is that important to sales? And everybody hates that. And I thought, that's why it's such a differentiator, is because people don't want to keep a certain set of practices religiously that generates results. But look, if you look at anyone who's succeeding in any endeavor, pick one: sales, leadership, sports, anything, the entertainment business, whatever it is, they have a set of practices, a set of disciplines that serve them. And for me, writing is one of those disciplines. I started writing daily on December 28th, 2009. I made a very, very specific decision to write and share what I know on a blog. I was watching Seth Godin do this. And from that day forward, I just started writing every day. But the discipline for me is paying attention to what I'm noticing, paying attention to what causes people to succeed or fail, paying attention to how people believe different things and how those beliefs either serve them or provide them with consequences that they don't yet understand because the belief is so negative and so disempowering. And I've decided to capture all of that and share it in real time. And the discipline for me is just getting up in the morning and writing. You're talking to me on a Saturday morning because this is the best time for me to do podcasts. I try to save the rest of my week for businesses. But the first thing I did this morning when I got up at 4:30 after I got coffee going, because that's the most important thing every day. The second most important thing is sitting down to write. And I wrote a couple thousand words in book number 3 and part of a blog post. And that to me is just the discipline and is how I continue to create.
Awesome. What type of coffee do you drink?
Black coffee, just Starbucks house blend black coffee. Awesome.
So when you think of what was it that really triggered this discipline? So, and you know, there's a number of different things that you've said there that kind of remind me of somebody else that I'm interested in listening to and interested in the content that he puts out in the marketplace, which is Jocko Willink. And Jocko has a book out there, Discipline Equals Freedom, his manual or his field manual. He has a book out there, Extreme Ownership. He has a podcast that's out there. He also talks about waking up at 4:30 in the morning and that discipline of doing that. Are you a Jocko fan? Do you know who he is? Is that someone who you've kind of come across in the marketplace?
Yeah, I've come across his work. I don't know him. I would like to know him, and I'd like to get him on my podcast at some point just to talk about specifically just about discipline, because I think it's so important. But I think when you look at people who are doing anything and you just start to notice what do they believe. And a guy like Jocko, I've had a number of people tell me that we're very, very much alike in our belief structures. You find out that discipline is actually the easy way and being undisciplined is the hard way. And it's a mindset shift for many, many people who think that avoiding doing the difficult things is easier than doing the difficult things, when in truth, doing the difficult things makes life much easier than avoiding them. And he and I share that central premise. The more you're willing to do the things that other people refuse to do or try to avoid doing, success just comes much easier in every endeavor.
One of the other pieces that you talked about is doing the work. You know, so the discipline of doing the work, whether it's doing the work for your clients throughout the week or the doing the work for a podcast like this on a Saturday, or the doing the work for sitting down and writing 1,000-word blog post. There's a lot of noise out in the marketplace, and it's something we struggle with, is getting the signal to play above the noise or break through the noise. How do you distinguish between signal and noise when you see new players coming into the marketplace?
I don't pay a lot of attention to social media, and I'm very selective about what I take in. And I'm not as aware of things as I would probably like to be. But I think that the market already for ideas is crowded. And I'm a content marketer and I'm a publisher. I'm not as good of a consumer as some other people. I don't spend a lot of time studying a lot of other things that are going on for a couple reasons. One, there is way too much noise with too little signal. And there's a lot of repetition of what I think are unhealthy ideas and unhealthy beliefs. And I just spend most of my time trying to avoid those things. And I try to focus on things that have stood the test of time. And one of the ways to know whether an idea or something has real value is to look and see if it stood the test of time. And the things that are useful tend to be very, very old. And the first half of the first book, The Only Sales Guide You'll Ever Need, is all of those kinds of things like discipline and caring and optimism, resourcefulness, initiative, persistence. Those are attributes that we could go back 5,000 years and find those same attributes in people who were succeeding then. They just really haven't changed very much. And when you look at the structures of what sales interactions and what it means to be consultative or a trusted advisor, you're going to find things like trust and caring and accountability. And those things haven't changed for thousands of years either. I'm more interested in timeless principles and things that have served people for thousands of years than I am any new thing that's coming out.
Yep. And it's those timeless principles are kind of brings me back to the discussion around Don and you know, his story brand framework. But one of the quotes from your book is one of the primary tasks of the human mind is to assess risk and direct the body to take action with the goal of keeping you alive. How does that influence, or can you talk a little bit about that and why you put that in the book and how it impacts what we should all be doing when we think about working with our customer base?
There's a couple things that are wrapped up in there. One, generally, your brain has been designed to keep you alive, and it's constantly surveying your environment for things that you should be afraid of and things that you should avoid. That's its primary role. It's got a very, very high propensity to recognize everything as a danger and a risk and provide you with fear to keep you from hurting yourself. And this is how your genes stay alive and propel themselves into future generations, by not doing anything dumb and getting yourself in trouble. It's the same thing for our clients. They look at us and think, you're asking me to change, and now I have to step out of the known and into the unknown. And that comes with concerns. But in the day and age that we live in now, you're very unlikely to be eaten by a predator. And that fear doesn't serve you anymore. And you still have a great deal of fear about losing membership in the tribe or doing something where people don't trust you and you're ostracized. And that manifests itself in the same way. And it does for your clients too. And what I think is important about that is that we look at this and say, our job here is to help resolve concerns and to help people take action. And if there's a thread through all of my work, it is that thread to say, we're here to help make things better. And that means we have to have different mindsets and different skill sets and different toolkits. And we have to take action, even though we don't really know what's coming next. But we do know that the most dangerous thing for any of us right now is to just stay with the status quo and not do anything different.
And as you were going through that, you really hit on, one of the mindsets that you hit on is caring. You talk about in the book optimism, but I'm going to shift into another piece that you were discussing when you said trusted advisor. In order to be a trusted advisor, you need to build trust, but you also have to provide advice, which gets into business acumen as a skill set. How can people improve their business acumen?
There's a lot of ways. I would tell you, if I were starting now as a young person in sales, I would take every chance I had to interact with clients in a way that allowed me to interview them so that I could get their insight and their knowledge about how someone like me could help them create better results. What should I be thinking about? How should I be thinking about it? How do you think about it? What are all the tricky points in what you're doing that are nuanced that would be helpful for me to understand? And I would try to get that kind of an education. Also, if you have an opportunity to work with people who are ahead of you on the path and they have the business acumen that you want, spend time with them. If you're in sales, go on sales calls with people who have made a lot of sales calls so you can pick up their language choices and you can sit down with them and say, why did you ask that question? And why did you ask it that way? What were you trying to get at? And why did they ask you this question? What were they trying to get at? I didn't understand that. I think those things are fundamental to speeding up the acquisition of business acumen. In addition to that, there's a lot of other things you can do. You can pick up a good business book, and almost doesn't matter what the business book is, you're going to learn something from it. Or listen to CNBC instead of listening to Howard Stern. Turn the radio to something where you're going to actually listen to business people talk about their business, which is why I like CNBC so much, is because you're listening to CEOs come on and talk about their business and how they think about competitive threats and what their strategies are. And when you start to take all of that in, you start to be aware of the vocabulary and the concepts and how people think about what they're doing to compete and grab market share and generate value for customers. It's a really, really smart way to get smarter faster. I do think it is something that people should spend time thinking about. And it's something that there's another book by a friend of mine, Jack Malcolm, about just gaining business acumen and how to think about profit and loss statements and balance sheets and things of that nature, which are important to know too. But I think the Only Sales Guide is the first book that really outlined that, as this is a primary skill now for salespeople, is to understand how to produce business results for your customers. And it's critical. And whatever your plan is to acquire it, you need some sort of plan that you can work, and you need a disciplined approach to acquiring it.
Yeah, and you hit on the nail on the head there with you have to have a plan and you need to start executing against that plan. And this is work, and you've got to look at it as work.
But the people who are listening to this are doing it right now, right?
They are.
If you're listening to podcasts, you're picking it up.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons we like the medium so much. I have liked the medium is the ability to learn from others, gain experience from people like the guests that Tim Ferriss has on his podcast or the guests that you've had on your podcast, and just the range that comes from the knowledge that people can share. So you talk about asking others for help. How often have you run into a situation where you've asked others for help, where you've taken a disciplined approach to asking it, meaning you've been able to provide some context about why you're reaching out to them, why you're asking them this question, why you're asking for their advice? How often have you, when you've done that work and you've asked for help, have people said no?
I've had a lot of people say no. It comes with the territory, but it doesn't matter that one person that you ask for help doesn't give you the help. I ask for help all the time. This morning, I was writing a chapter in the new book about a new way of thinking about the discovery process. And I'm using Ken Wilber's integral theory. Mm-hmm. And Ken is an American philosopher and just one of the brightest minds on planet Earth, maybe ever in the history of planet Earth. And I went to Ken and his people told me no 5 times. And I persisted because I wanted to go to the source to learn how to think about integral theory. And I continued to persist long enough that I got a yes. And now Ken and I are friends. And I talked to him on the phone for hours. And I've had the ability to learn from the person who developed the theory how to apply the theory, which has changed the way that I do my work and how I think about helping other people. But you have to ask for help when you don't have the capacity to do something, where you're missing some of the knowledge, where you're missing the mindset or the skill set. You're obligated to call and try to get help, ask other people to do something for you so that they can help you and you can get better. And then you can pay that forward by helping other people. And I don't think it ever makes sense to think that you have to go it alone as a human being. We're pack animals. We're better in tribes than we are individually. We're all parts of communities. And if you join a community and you start to contribute, you ask and you're going to find a lot of people willing to help you.
Yeah. And you hit on another really important point there, which is never fail alone. And that is whether you're moving into a new market. So this could be not only new sales professionals, but you move into a new market and you're looking to educate yourself on the market. Gain that education both through the things that you can read that are publicly sourced, also through the experts who have been in that market for a long period of time. These are things that apply whether you are 2 years into your sales career or 20 years into your sales career and you're starting to change industries. I want to shift over to the current book that's out there, The Lost Art of Closing. And there's a core focus on commitment. And you talk about one huge, and this is another quote from the book, one huge but common mistake that sales pros make is presenting the solution and failing to gain the next commitment. Can you talk about how you learned the importance of gaining that next commitment and how you apply it?
I picked that up first from Neil Rackham's Spin Selling. And that book came out in 1988. I must have read it in 1992 or 1993 after I was forced into an outside sales role and I started to try to develop the skill sets and I wanted to acquire those faster. I started reading books to accelerate my learning. The part of the book that was most interesting to me, actually, there were 2 parts. The first part that was really interesting to me was just implication questions. And I beat people with implication questions like it was the biggest stick you've ever seen. And it was, Mike, if you don't change, what happens? What's the price if you don't make a change now? How difficult is your peak season going to be if you don't do something about this? And the implication questions were so compelling to people. You have to talk about change. But before that in the book, before it even gets into the model, Rackham discusses the difference between salespeople who are succeeding and salespeople who are struggling from observations on 34,000 sales calls. That's a lot of sales calls to watch. And one of the things that they noticed that ended up covering about 3 pages in the book, I think it starts on 67, somewhere right in that neighborhood, was that salespeople who were succeeding always asked for an advance. They always gained a commitment that moved them closer to a deal. And it wasn't the final commitment because these were B2B salespeople. And walking in and saying, hi, you should buy from us. Can I give you a contract? Doesn't work. There's a whole bunch of commitments that we have to make first before we can get to that point where we can ask for the business. And people who were not succeeding were getting what he called a continuation, which is, Mike, it was very nice to meet you and we'll get back to you at some time in the future. We really enjoyed meeting you and love everything you have to say. Sounds really positive, but there's no next step. There's no next commitment. And that to me was the most interesting part of the book. And for me, the most easy to apply, because what it says is don't leave a meeting without another meeting. And I like very, very broad line rules like that, bright lines where you can see the rule very clearly. Don't leave a meeting without deciding what comes next and getting that commitment. At that time, I would walk around with a Franklin Covey planner, which would be this giant binder that you carry around with a calendar in it. And I would open it up on the client's desk. And before a meeting ended, I would always say, Mike, I think it makes sense for us to tour your operation, have my team meet your people, get a deeper understanding of what they're doing. What do you look like next Thursday for us to do that work? And they would invariably say, that sounds good. And I was controlling the process, and I believed I was supposed to know what comes next. And that worked really, really well for me.
And think
what
about
I noticed.
Anthony, and for the audience, think about how different that is than, okay, let me know once you've had a chance to review this with you and your team, and we'll schedule a follow-up meeting. Yep. If I don't hear from you in 2 weeks, I'll check in. I mean, there's a complete distinction between those two approaches. By opening up, go ahead.
What you've laid out is the commitment to resolve concerns. And the challenge for most of us is the client says, hand over your proposal and your pricing. I'm going to meet with my team and share it with them, and we'll get back to you. And nothing good can come from that because, again, we're leaving them sit with their fears and their doubts and their uncertainties. And what if it doesn't work? And are we spending the right money? Can I trust these people? What if we fail? Will somebody here lose their job? Will we lose a client? And there's all these questions that they have when they're looking at it, and you're not there to help them. And I've never understood why it makes sense to let them sit by themselves with their fears. And they'll say something to you like, we just need a little time to look it over. Well, time isn't going to resolve anybody's concerns. Time tends to accelerate and exacerbate their concerns. They start to get worse when they're sitting by themselves with their fears saying, you know what, I am concerned whether or not this is going to work. Yeah, me too. Maybe we should kick this down the road and we'll look at it again in 6 months. That's what happens when we're not there. I think in all cases, what we want to do is control the process. And I think we need to be able to go to people and say, Mike, you and your team are going to have questions, and I want to make sure that I'm here to serve you. And I want to make sure that you're 100% confident in any decision to move forward. And to do that, I'm going to ask you to share your concerns with me. And if there's anything else that I can provide you in the way of proof that would make you feel 100% confident moving forward, I'd like the opportunity to do that. But we have to have that conversation. Otherwise, we leave them to their own devices. And that's not what a trusted advisor does. You don't let people get hurt because you don't want to have a conversation with them if you're a trusted advisor. The role means that I'm not going to let you get hurt.
Yep. You now kind of, and like I said, we were going to jump around between some topics and different components that are talked about in the different books. I think this was still discussed in your most recent one, but it's how do you distinguish between objections and concerns? Because you talk about concerns, but objections that come up are real. What's the difference between the two?
The objection is something like, now is not a good time. But the concern that's behind that objection is, I didn't hear enough value in what you're offering me in trade for my time that I can say yes to it.
Yep.
And if you decide, well, when is a better time, you're answering the objection. But the objection really wasn't about their time. It was about the wasting of their time. And I didn't hear enough value. To resolve the real concern, I have to create greater value, not pick another time. Because if I'm a time waster now, or I'm a time waster a month from now, I'm still a time waster. Yep. And I have to change that perception. If you hear something like, that's a lot of money, I don't think we can afford that. That is not a concern about the spending of the money. It's a concern about, I'm not sure that the value that you're going to create is equal to the investment that I'm putting in, which means we need to go back and evaluate that and say, if this is the wrong investment for you to make, one of two things is wrong. We've either overshot the mark on this solution dramatically, or we're doing the wrong thing. Let's take a look at this together and see what it is. But the concern is about, I'm not going to spend this amount of money for the value as you've described it now. It would need to be greater value. But when we look at it only through the objection, then we start thinking that we're arguing about the money when we're arguing about the outcomes. And that's the difference between an objection and a concern. The objection is what you hear. The concern is what is between the lines that if you pay attention, you can very quickly pick up.
Yeah, it's that underlying focus, the between the lines information, which gets back to another thing that we talk about from a catalyst sale approach, is that and really it's just sales in general. These are all foundational skills. Sales is a thinking process. If you're going to take templates and try to walk a client through your list of the top 20 questions to business fit, and you don't iterate on those questions based on what you hear from the client or adapt those questions into natural language that makes sense both for you and the client, you are forcing them to move through your process, and you're not caring, you're not demonstrating interest in their success. I want to shift gears, but I'll highlight again, the two books are The Only Sales Guide You'll Ever Need and The Lost Art of Closing. As you said, you've got a third that's coming up toward
kind of an unfortunate first title to call your book The Only Sales Guide You'll Ever Need and then write two more.
Yeah, it's one of those where people kind of say, well, how do I trust this guy? I thought I only needed that first one. Why do I have this follow-up?
The rest are a bonus.
Yeah, there are always bonuses. And I mean, it's the other thing that happens is, again, this human mind and some of the differences that we have, we need to hear different stories in different contexts for them to relate, for those synapses to connect to things that we've done before. So, good content always has a place. So I expect that there will be many other books published at some point in time in the future, either by you or by others. I think that's would be a safe bet to make.
Pretty good bet. So
on your podcast recently, and I think this is the one with Lee Bartlett, you had a guest on and you were talking about, and you kind of highlighted it as you were going through this last little bit, but when you say using price as an advantage, what do you mean?
Price is an advantage, but not the way that most salespeople think of it. They think the lower price is the advantage, but a higher price is a heuristic. It's a shortcut that the brain takes, or a rule of thumb that allows someone to understand this is greater value. This is better than other things because it has a higher price. Is that always true? No, it's not always true, but it's mostly true. And if you look at Mercedes-Benz or a BMW, it's a different car than a Kia or even a great car like a Toyota Camry. It's a different level. And Mercedes has a higher price because they're going to deliver a better automobile to you. When you look at places like Tiffany's, and when you look at certain consulting groups and people that create value in a customer intimacy model, people that invest more in that model and get a deeper intimacy, a deeper understanding, are more accountable for producing results, they charge more money. And it's very, very easy to see that they're worth money. And a lot of salespeople think that for price to be an advantage, it has to be lower. But when it's lower, that means what we're literally doing is taking money out of the client's solution. And it's difficult to produce results when they make a full investment in getting the result that they want. But by taking money out of a solution, you're making it more difficult. I see price as a sword, not a shield. I see it as something, my higher price is an advantage because I have more money to invest in getting the outcome. I have better people. We have better processes. We have better technology. There's a lot of things that go into being better, all of which take an investment of time and energy and money. And why I think it's an advantage is because when you work with grown-ups, when you work with people who have a certain level of maturity as a business person, they've been lied to and they've been promised better, faster, and cheaper enough times that they no longer believe it. In my experience, that's about 3 times of buying. If you just change providers and make us your partner, I can give you better, faster, and cheaper. But at some point when that doesn't work, people say, all right, I want to make the investment necessary now to get the results that I want. The best salesperson is not the salesperson who can lower the amount of money that someone's spending. The best salesperson is a person who can get the client to invest the right amount of money, normally more money, to produce the outcome that they really need and generate greater results. That's really what we're trying to do. And that's why I think price is an advantage. Yeah.
And one of the sloppy tactics that new sales reps fall into, and even old sales reps, I mean, this happens all over the place, is the idea of discounting. And the question that I've got to ask there is, what are you discounting? Are you discounting the value that you're delivering to the customer? What perception are you creating? What changed? Like, why would you tell me that this is, let's say we're in a SaaS-based model and it's $400 a year per employee at whatever volume you're delivering it to, and you discount it 20%. What changed in the need need inside the organization, or what changed in the use case in the organization to warrant that discount? And if you can sell it at that level, why didn't you start at that level? Let's not play games anymore.
It's because salespeople don't really understand that there are only 3 business strategies, and we don't spend time teaching salespeople to understand business strategy. The lowest price model is a strategy. It's not a tactic. It's not something that you do to win business. You don't walk into Walmart and they say to you, Mike, listen, it's normally $24, but because it's you and because we have this relationship, I've talked to my sales manager, I can get it to you for $18.
Right.
They always have the lowest price. That's the strategy. And when you look at somebody like Apple, that's a pure play strategy of best product. That's the game that they play. They're always going to have the best product, and they're always going to charge a premium for it because that's the model. They're not going to discount. They do have a discount because right now while we're recording this, it's Christmas season here.
Right.
They have a discount. It's $50. They'll give you a $50 gift card if you buy, a $2,200 laptop. And that's the extent of what their Black Friday sale looks like. They're not going to discount the model. But most of us work in businesses where we don't have the very best product and we don't have the very lowest price, which means we're operating what Michael Treacy and Fred Wiersama and the discipline of market leaders call customer intimacy strategy, which means we have to be better at solving the overall problem. We better be able to customize it for that client, and we better have deep knowledge in how to produce the outcomes that the client needs. So we're playing a different game, and that means that the investment needs to match the outcomes. And if you discount it, you're literally pulling money out of the solution that the client's asking you to help them with. And it doesn't make sense to do that. I'll give you one other observation. A lot of times I hear from sales leaders, our salespeople suck at closing and they're terrible negotiators. And I have to push back and say, actually, they're outstanding negotiators. They just negotiate with you instead of negotiating with the client because you're easier to negotiate with and you give them the concession that they're asking for. And they're terrific. You just need to turn them around and point them at the client first and let them go back and negotiate that way. And you're going to find out they're fine. But you're going ahead and giving them permission to do it. So I don't blame the rep. I blame their leadership team and their managers for not helping them understand why they shouldn't do this and how it damages long-term results.
It's an awesome perspective to take. I've been fortunate enough to lead some really good sales teams over my career, both on the direct side and on the indirect side. And as a sales leader, when your sales rep or member of the sales team is playing the game and they're negotiating with you. And it just becomes such a time suck on this internal negotiation to get these things done, when really what we try to do with our team is shift that around and say, let's not spend time, energy, and resources on that side. Let's make sure that we understand what we're doing for the customer, how we're doing that for the customer, whether or not our solution actually fits, can solve their problem. If it can solve their problem, is it feasible for them to implement it? Will they actually be able to execute it? Because if they can't execute it, there's really not a deal to be had here. And that becomes more of an if-then statement. So as you're going through this, that was a pretty simple explanation of business strategies, the strategies that are out there. Why do we tend to overcomplicate things?
I might be contributing to that. I mean, there's so many of us with different ideas and different opinions. I think that we think too much about what we want to do in the way of activities and not enough about what's necessary to get the outcome. And a lot of times we're searching for ways to make things easier because we're trying to avoid doing what's necessary to produce the outcome. And a lot of times we substitute technology and we substitute other approaches from them what's really necessary. And I think that it's just one of the great things that human beings do. We find a way to overcome some problem, and in doing so, we create a new level of problem to solve. And it's part of human evolution, and it's why we are right now, the human mind is the greatest supercomputer on earth. It figures out how to solve a problem, and in doing so, creates a higher level problem. And that's been human cultural evolution for as long as we've been human.
Well, Anthony, we've talked about a number of different topics over the course of the discussion. Is there anything that we've not talked about yet that you're surprised either I haven't asked or surprised we haven't gotten into?
No, I'm not surprised at all. The only thing that I would probably say, if I had a closing argument here, I would say the most important thing for anyone listening to this, if you want to make selling easier and if you want to do really good work, the first thing that you should do is just be somebody worth doing business with in the first place. And there's not too many things that are better than that and making it easy for people to decide to do business with you.
Awesome. Anthony, where can people find more about you?
You can find me at thesalesblog.com. That's where I publish every day. You can also find me at youtube.com/Iannarino. And both books are on Amazon and Audible.
Awesome. Well, Anthony, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoy your work. Look forward to seeing the third book that'll come out in the later half of 2018, and just really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Visit thesalesblog.com to find out more about Anthony, listen to In the Arena, or pick up one of his books. Thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.